Welcome everyone. So this is the third session, the fourth session of the Research Transparency Campaign. This campaign intends to bring awareness on pre-registration and any other open research practices necessary to ensure transparency in the research workflow. And this is a collaboration between ERIM, Erasmus University Library, and the Erasmus Research Services. My name is Liz Guzman-Ramirez, and I am the Research Data Steward for RSM and ESE. And together with me, we organized this session with Mutaleni Nedimi from the library, she's a project manager, and Antonia Krefeld-Schwalb, the Open Science Coordinator for the Erasmus Research Services, ERS. So we're very happy to welcome you to this session. Also, if you're interested in open science, please consider joining the Open Science Community Rotterdam, where researchers and support staff help each other in learning, discussing, and adopting open science practices. Mutaleni will put the link in the chat so you can join later. So today's panel session will bust or not the myths and concerns on pre-registration. And we welcome your sessions in the chat, or at the end of the session, you can raise your hand and we'll give you the floor. So today we are honored to be joined by Julia Roos from ESE, from the Erasmus School of Economics, Antonia Krefeld-Schwalb from the Rotterdam School of Management, so RSM, and Gabriele Paolacci, also from RSM. So I will start with a bit of an introduction of this session, and I will sort of set the floor for them to then speak. So we are gonna bust the 3 concerns on pre-registration. So just to give you a bit of this is the agenda. So first I will give you a quick of an introduction. Antonia will bust or explain the concern number 1, which is I need to look at my data before I can decide how to best analyze it. Then Julia Roos from the Erasmus School of Economics, she will talk about concern number 2, pre-registration prevents exploratory research. And then Gabriele Paolacci will talk about that pre-registration might delay data collection. Now, these 3 concerns come from an open science survey we ran last year at RSM and ESE. If you use the QR code, you will see the report. It's a public report on the results of this survey. And this survey was touching on pre-registration, open materials, open data, pre-publication, open access, general experience, awareness of available tools, and the role of ERIM. And one of the questions was on the pre-registration was, how important is it in your field? So if you see people consider it actually relatively important, but in their experience, they were aware, but haven't used it very much. And they also, one of the question was, what do you want ERIM to support you with? Most of them, or 50% of the respondents said that they wanted to know about pre-registration, how to pre-register. So this is why this campaign started. So we thought it's important to talk about it and to teach you, or to at least discuss what options you have. So this was the one question of what are your concerns on pre-registration? So what do you think? Why haven't you been able to practice it? And these were the top 3 concerns. So I need to look at my data before I can decide it, how to best analyze it. It might delay data collection, or pre-registration prevents exploratory research. So we're going to talk about these 3 top concerns. For that, as I mentioned, Antonia will start. So I'll give the floor to Antonia. If you can request the control. Yeah, perfect. So now is yours.
Oh. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And this also works. Wow. Okay, so depending on your research question and also your field of research and the data that you look at, the data sets that you want to study can be extremely complex. So they can involve many different variables that are in different formats. Sometimes it's you have to make sure that you know the condition of the variable and so on, or you have some kind of process data such as eye tracking data or mouse tracking data, or even neurological data that can have like very big data files that are very unstructured and can even be lookalike messy. So this just to bring the data in the right format and the right structure so that you can so that it's actually suitable for description and analysis can take a lot of time and effort. And it might be the case that some of the distributions are actually non-normal, or that they are not in the distribution that you need for the analysis. So they could be bimodal, negatively or positively skewed, or uniform, and that would require then transformation for the analysis. So the question is, how is it possible to know all that before data collection and before pre-registration? And here I would like to share three not mutually exclusive solutions to that problem. The first one is probably the solution that I prefer the most, which is simulation. So instead of just using your data and running the analysis, you could first simulate the data that you expect for your analysis. And there's a very nice R package called FO that you can use for factorial designs, for instance. So for many of the designs that you may be using in your research. The strategy also has additional benefits. So for instance, it improves your statistical knowledge, but it also improves your coding skills, and it helps you to make much better informed analysis decision. And this is, of course, a free package, so you can just try it out. The second solution is, again, also very useful, is to use existing data sets. So you could search on the Open Science Framework, for instance, to find data sets that study the same or a similar research question, or use your old data sets from yourself that are similar to the data set that you expect to collect. And this also has some additional benefits because it helps you to understand sources of noise that you might not necessarily be able to simulate, and also helps you to estimate then the amount of noise, helps you to identify the shape of the distribution that you might have not be able to simulate in the right way again. And this again improves your decisions for the analysis. And the final solution is probably the most tricky or most fishy one, which is to run a small pilot study. I often do this mainly to make sure that the data collection goes well, and so that the entire process of the survey and everything is correct. And this again helps to understand the structure of the data perfectly, so to know which kind of transformations you have to do to the data to bring it in the right format. So to determine all these pre-processing steps, and the best aspect or the best benefit of this is that you can actually write the analysis script, so the exact analysis script, and add it to your pre-registration, so that you just have to make one click when you have the final empirical data set. So again, it might look like that many of the decisions that you need to make for your analysis are not possible to make without looking at the data, but actually here I present you three different solutions that can help you to get a more precise expectations of the data that you will be seeing after the empirical data is recorded, and that can help you to make your pre-registration most precise.
Thank you. Since we're going through different concerns, I don't know if anyone has a question. We could tackle it now. Otherwise, we can wait until the end of all the three concerns. If there's anything pressing. Okay, if not, then it's fine. Then we go to the second concern. Yeah, so this was 20%, roughly 20% of the researchers responded that they had this concern. So this is I give the floor to Julia. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I don't have, control, thank you. Okay, so I'm talking a bit about the second concern, that pre-registration prevents exploratory research. So I will start with the first point, that of course it will definitely prevent some kinds of exploratory research. So there's no doubt about it. Pre-registration will prevent some kinds of this. But then what I want to point out at first is that there might be some cases where it's actually desirable to prevent that kind of exploratory research, if you even want to term it like that. And the first is the first case. So I want to look at two potentially problematic cases. And here, one case is if we use different methods and or variables that we use for different analyses, and then the most significant one is presented, and the decision on the methods finally included in the paper are ex post rationalized. So that's basically called p-hacking. I'm picking out the most significant result with all of the analysis I've conducted. I decide to put this in the spotlight in the paper, and all of the other things are either not included or at least only included as a side note or maybe in the appendix. So that is a problematic case where, yeah, exploratory analysis to find the best or the most successful, most significant analysis is presented. The second case is also problematic. So if you, for example, don't find the main effect that you expected in the first place, it's not found in the overall sample, but it turns out that some hand-picked subsamples, for example, show significant results. And again, afterwards, you find arguments, you ex post rationalize the fitting stories around these results, and the paper is then written around these results. So that's called forking. And I think we all agree that these might be problematic cases. But then, of course, you might now think, well, she claims that all exploratory research is bad practice, and she just claims that exploratory research means that these are those two very bad cases, and these are extreme, and they are considered bad practice anyway. Well, for that, of course, I fully agree. Those were very extreme cases, and this is what we hope that nobody does in the first place, to really oversell your results or to handpick things that you haven't thought before. But, well, there is actually enough room to include exploratory research. The difference now is with pre-registration that it's now openly declared as exploratory. And I'm not saying this is bad, it's just different. Of course, you can, after having looked at your data, after having ran the analysis, you can always find something in the data that you haven't thought of before, but you think it's important to convey. Yes, of course, you can still do that. So it adds transparency to the whole process. But then, well, how can I include exploratory research in my studies after a pre-registration? Because, of course, I've set out all of the things I try to analyze, I've set out the study design, and then I found something that I want to include or something that I want to look differently to the data ex post. That can always happen. Well, for that, I want to take a step back, actually. So first, I want to recall a few points on why we do pre-registration in the first place. And first of all, it gives you a framework to guide the analysis. It's something it's a guideline, but it's not something you're glued to. This is what I really want to emphasize. And all of the analyses that are included should also be included in the final paper. So that is definitely true. You can, if you have a good reason, always deviate from that, but in general, everything should be included. And this prevents, for example, p-hacking and forking, as I explained before. And that makes the results more trustworthy to a certain extent. So I fully agree, this is not the one in all remedy for all of the things we have, but it adds to the transparency. And you can still include exploratory research. And again, yeah, but how do I include exploratory analysis then? Because I've not really addressed that point so far. And you can always do it in a separate section that's labeled exploratory research. That can be a separate section in the paper where you afterwards collect all the things you really want to still convey to the reader to include in your paper. And that can always be done afterwards. And this can be an addition to the results you obtained and that you have planned before, and as an indication for further directions for future research to validate those results further. Because again, it's not what you tried to find in the first place. You didn't have a clear story before why you want to include it, but you can still do it afterwards as in a separate section. So my conclusions on exploratory research and pre-registration are, well, first of all, it does not prevent exploratory research in general. And I do think it's very important that it does not do that in general. It just adds to the overall transparency of research and the reliability of the results. So now it becomes very clear what was your plan in the first step of the process and what you decided to do afterwards. I don't say it's less relevant if you come up with things afterwards, but it just adds to the transparency that you say, this is not what I actually planned, but this is still an important finding that I want to convey. But this also requires that pre-registration is viewed as one of many tools, and, which is even more important, not as a dogmatic, we can absolutely only include pre-registered analysis in the final paper type of remedy. Because if that is the thing, of course, exploratory research is prevented. But I think I want to emphasize that this is not how pre-registration should be viewed as. So this is not like a dogmatic thing that this is the only thing you can do and there's nothing else you can do. But as long as you see that, I think it's a useful tool. It doesn't prevent anything. It just helps to detect bad practices. It's a tool of detection of things that are a bit fishy to a certain extent, I'd say.
Thank you so much, Julia. Yeah, all right. I don't know if there are any questions or anything that wants to be addressed. Yeah, Andreas, please.
Yeah, hi, thanks for this. So I don't know much about pre-registration, which is why I'm here. I know a few things about statistical methodology, so I thought I maybe I can provide some relevant context. Like if, for example, looking at regression analysis, there's a lot of research in statistics now done on variable selection and how can we get accurate standard errors and significance tests after we perform the variable selection. So I think that there might still be a way to incorporate something like this, some exploratory analysis like this into a pre-registered study, like you just specify which method for variable selection you will use and how you will conduct the tests afterwards. So that might be one thing. And another thing that could be done, a lot of these approaches, like you want to split a little bit the exploratory part and the testing parts. And one way to do that is to split your sample. And this could also be incorporated into a pre-registration, I would think, that you just explain. I will split my sample of the data that I collect. I will use the first part to do this exploratory analysis, and then I will use the second part to test my findings from the first subsample. So again, I don't know if that is feasible for pre-registration, but I thought I mentioned these for to get some discussion going.
I think if I can reply to that immediately, because that was an important thing I also wanted to point out, is that of course these exploratory analysis can be included in the pre-registration in the first place. So I only focused on the cases where yeah, you have some results ex post that you want to include, but you haven't thought about them beforehand. Because I fully agree, of course. I could also think about hypotheses that are not directional, that are just like, or in general, I just want to look at the data and find out what is going on there without having any kind of idea beforehand. But that, of course, I can also include in my pre-registration. But I wanted to point out that it's also not bad if after you have looked at the data and something comes to your mind after having, for me, it would be an experiment, conducted the experiment, seen that something is going on, and I still think it's very important, but it's nowhere in the pre-registration just because I haven't thought about it, and still that's possible. But I fully agree, all of the other things can even include it beforehand. All
right, thanks for the clarification. I missed that part, yeah.
Thank you. Antonia, do you want to add something? You are muted, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Is it working now? Okay, so there's always a delay. So I just wanted to mention that the aspect that Andreas mentioned, in particular variable selection from the regression models, is maybe one of the most important things to add to a pre-registration, because it involves, in particular, if you have very large panel data sets, there are many degrees of freedom that increase the probability of a false positive result enormously. So having here a very structured way of deciding which variables to include and exclude and pre-register this process is actually very essential, I think.
Great, thank you. All right. If there's no more comments, we can move on to the third concern. So this will be tackled by Gabriele, and this was again the response percentage, yeah, and the distribution. Now, Gabriele, the floor is yours.
All right, everyone can hear me, and I think I can move the slides here. Yeah, third concerns, the fact that pre-registration might delay data collection. So this is not a myth that I'm going to bust, because I think this is a statement which is trivially true. Yeah, so pre-registration will delay data collection, like pretty much anything that you decide to do before data collection will delay data collection. So if you decide to have a pizza before data collection, which I recommend, it will delay data collection. So this is absolutely true. So how should we think about this cost that we're essentially facing for pre-registering our studies? Well, I think it's productive to think about this cost in the context of other costs which might exist, and in the context of the benefits that we get in return for the cost that we decide to face. So what happens if we put this in a broader context? Well, first off, the fact that it will delay data collection might look, and I suspect that's the reason why 20% of the people say it's a reason not to pre-register or something that's a concern. It might look like a big cost, but it is not as big as it seems. The reason is that it will delay data collection, but that doesn't necessarily imply that it will delay the research process more generally. Mostly, not exclusively, but mostly what you do when you pre-register a study is front-loading the effort that you would have to put after the data collection anyway. So in terms of deciding how to analyze your data, in terms of writing up your methods, you're essentially moving some of that part from after data collection to before the data collection. So it is a smaller cost than it seems, in the sense that delaying data collection doesn't correspond to an equal delay in the submission of your paper, for example. Of course, there are some remaining parts which are not front-loaded, but it's smaller than it seems. And so what are the other costs of pre-registration? Then nothing. There are no other costs for pre-registration. Yeah, so there's literally nothing. Yeah. So are there benefits which are large enough for us to face the cost of, a little bit of a delay in the data collection? So what do we get in return here for this pre-registration thing? Well, the first thing, which I think is at least the most important, or I think possibly the most integral benefits of pre-registration, is the fact that it allows for truly falsifiable predictions. I think this is mostly what Daniel Lakens have talked about last week. And also, I think some of these points, Julia alluded to them when she addressed this concern. Essentially, we're getting closer to an ideal of science, at least in a proper sense, basically, or at least in a meta sense. So when we see some prediction on a paper, that's a falsifiable prediction, also because we can know whether that was a true prediction that was made by the researcher or not. So the fact that there's a stamp on a prediction makes it more falsifiable, which is exactly what we aspire to do when we do science. And that's a true value, the intrinsic value of pre-registration. Yeah. If you're not convinced, or if you're not idealistic enough, which I think is fine, there's other benefits of pre-registration, which I think are pretty big. One, which in my opinion is possibly the most underappreciated benefit of pre-registration, is the idea that it just makes you a better researcher. And that's also true for other open science practices. Why is that? Well, if you go and pre-register your study, you're essentially making your present self accountable to your future self. Yeah. So you're deciding exactly what you're going to do, and you're constraining the hands of your future self. Yeah. Now, you don't want your future self to be disappointed. Yeah. You don't want to make a mistake now. Yeah. Because your future self is going to be paying for that. And that means that you're going to be paying much more attention to the decisions that you make. So you're going to be having, on average, a more thoughtful design, a more thoughtful reasoning behind the measures that you're going to collect, and you're going to be thinking about your analysis much more carefully than you would do otherwise. So it essentially, pre-registration also creates an incentive to just become better at performing the the activities that you would have to do regardless. And I think this is very important, or at least based on introspection, I can tell that pre-registering makes me much more thoughtful in general. Yeah. There are other benefits that you might care, or I suspect many of you care. You might have a higher chance of publication. So pre-registration is something which is increasingly recommended by reviewers and to some extent even required by editors. And this is going to be more and more the case. So just by virtue of having a pre-registered study, all else being equal, you are increasing the chances that your study is going to be published, which again, this is an extrinsic benefit of pre-registration. It's not necessarily the reason for why you want to do that, but it's something that might resonate with quite few people. Yeah, and another even less intrinsically important benefit is the fact that there are reputational benefits also. Yeah, so the idea here is that open science is getting traction. ERIM is paying a lot of attention to it, and so are researchers across the world. So the extent to which you adhere to open science practices, pre-registration included, is going to have, if anything, yeah, a positive result in terms of your reputation as a researcher, at least in terms of a rigor of your research. Yeah? And finally, another point, which I think is also underappreciated a bit, is the fact that you might be having more impact as a result of pre-registering your study. And why do I think that? Well, I think we shouldn't lie about the fact that science hasn't been exactly always reliable in the past, or at least in the recent past. It has been proven that we probably trust the science in some cases more than we should have, because of the problems that, again, Julia's talked about. For example, p-hacking or forking paths, or let's not talk about the fraud and all the kind of stuff. Now, if you're a user or researcher, yeah, so if you're a practitioner or just another researcher, why would you trust science? Yeah, if you don't know exactly what happened, why would you trust automatically something which has just been said on a paper? Yeah, so you shouldn't necessarily automatically do that. So the more is going on in the research, which can essentially reassure users of research that that's a good stuff. Yeah. So for example, that the plan for analysis was exactly the plan that the researcher had in the beginning, the more people are going to be trusting the science, and the more impact we can expect, all else being equal, to exist on practice. Yeah. So a lot of benefits on the right, not much going on in terms of costs on the left. So at least in my opinion, the small cost that exists for delaying data collection, it's something that we can live with in the light of a lot of good things that happen when we pre-register.
Thank you so much for that. So, okay, now we are on the questions. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes, Anna, please.
Hi. So I see that the concerns that were mentioned so far are mostly the ones from the perspective of the researcher, that it might be a bit more costly for myself because I'm using pre-registration to do my research. I don't know if you can also say something about the concern that is a bit different, meaning even if, let's say, we were to do all of these things, would it actually help science? So the concern more from, does it actually help achieve anything? Because based on what kind of pre-registrations I've seen so far, they're very, I don't know, one A4 paper that describes some things rather vaguely, so vaguely that I find it a bit difficult to see how people are concerned that they might have to describe things in too much detail, or that they don't know exactly how they will analyze the data, because yeah, I don't really see these things described in as much detail. So to sum it up, even if we were to persuade people that these concerns about time costs are alleviated by benefits, would it really help in the end? Science, that is.
Maybe if I can reply to that. Well, I think as I said, it's only one part of the whole package, I think. If we say pre-registration will help alleviate all problems, I don't think so. Because yeah, clearly I can also, pre-registration can be done in very different ways. I can be completely vague in my pre-registration that it doesn't help anything for afterwards, because I'm just sufficiently vague with all of the things I'm planning to do in terms of analysis and how I conduct my research that yeah, it doesn't help anything. On the other hand, I can completely pre-register every single step of the process to a super great detail. That also might not help a lot, because then it's the dogmatic part where I think, yeah, it's very hard to deviate from that, because I always have to find very good arguments to deviate from that. But in general, as I said, if I find a middle ground, plus I provide my data openly, I provide my code, I provide a bit of rationale behind everything that I do, then I think the complete package actually helps science. But I agree, if we only focus on one aspect of it, like pre-registration, we debunk all the things and potential concerns, yeah, that will not get us anywhere as the only sole thing that helps. But I think as a combination of things, it can help a lot.
Thanks. Antonia, do you want to answer as well?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize again what Julia said. So of course, there's never a solution that will solve all the problems in empirical research. I think we agree on that. But I think for pre-registration, there are also two different levels to consider. One is the communication to the public, and one is also the communication to myself. So I think pre-registration also helps makes my own research better, because I think more about what I want to analyze in when I see the data. I can ensure that I really test only the hypothesis that I wanted to test, and don't say in hindsight, oh, I actually wanted to test this hypothesis, because I think it's often surprising to see how often you make small tweaks to your own hypothesis. So for that, I think it's very, very helpful. And then of course, I think the value of pre-registration also differs depending on the field of research and the type of research that is conducted there. So for instance, for many of the social psychology experiments where the analysis is relatively simple, I think pre-registration has sometimes an even higher value, so where there's more emphasis on the hypothesis and maybe but the analysis plays a relatively minor role, compared to when there is the data set is maybe some kind of involves neural data or processing data, where the analysis is often much more complex, or even cognitive modeling, where I think there's there often also is more thought went into the planned analysis beforehand already. So I think, yeah. So again, summarize. So two aspects. One is what is the audience of the pre-registration? Is it public or myself or my team? And the other aspect, I think, is the field of research that also can influence the worth of the pre-registration.
Thank you, Gabriele.
Yeah, just in the spirit of a discussion, I thought I'd push back a little on the second point of Antonia, in the sense that I don't know that it should depend on the field, because you made I think an interesting case for why it might be more useful in social psychology or in that field compared to others. But one could make the opposite case, that the more complicated stuff are, the more degrees of freedom exist, and the more there's a need for constraining yourself. And I think it's perhaps a little bit of a dangerous or at least a slippery slope, the one that we start distinguishing between fields in the extent to which they need something which is, all else being equal, something which helps, right? I know that's not the route that you wanted to suggest, but I think we shouldn't also want to hold people in different fields differently accountable for their practices, right? I think we should just push the idea that also kind of answers, I think, to Anna's concern. The idea that it's not necessary, it's certainly not sufficient for good science, probably not even necessary to some extent, but does it help? So how is pre-registration compared to the absence of pre-registration? That's good for everyone, I think. Maybe to different extent depending on what exactly you're doing, but it's certainly not harming anyone and it's beneficial for everyone. I think it's probably a lower bar to reach, but I think it's the most defendable one.
Yeah, and I think you want to respond on that.
Yeah, like I'm a bit skeptical on the it's not harming anyone part. It's not harming anyone, conditional on reviewers, editors, AEs actually checking the pre-registration properly. Because if they don't, and they don't even check timestamps on the pre-registration and timestamps on data collection to notice that maybe it was more of a post-registration, then it does harm, because it creates this idea that, oh, these people have a tick on their list, so the paper is more likely to actually, I don't know, offer a more severe test.
Well, but compared to what? So that person who's going to be trying to play with that, how is that person going to behave absent pre-registration? That person is also not going to behave in a great way, right?
Yes, but the reviewers will not use the pre-registration mark as a cue for this has a tiny bit more value than a non-pre-registered study. Because the moment you use the pre-registration mark as a cue to infer higher quality without properly checking what was pre-registered and how was followed up, that introduces a risk there.
I just follow up quickly and then I shut up. I think I don't disagree that let's call it the badge can be abused. Absolutely, yeah. But what's a counterfactual? Again, I think it's an important question. Because again, absent that pre-registration, I don't think you're in a better position either as a reviewer or as an editor, and I don't think there's less scope for different sort of abuses. So I think I agree with that point. But in the context of depending on the counterfactual, I think it's not necessarily persuasive. That's my take. I'm done.
Antonia?
Delayed. Is it working now? Okay,
yeah,
good.
Yes.
So I just wanted to mention, because it reminds me of the argument against publishing data, that if you publish too much data, you can actually use these published data sets to fake your data in the most optimal way, right? So that's I think it's a similar argument, that it always opens the possibility for new forms of misconduct and new forms of faking. But I think that the costs of that misbehavior and the likelihood of this behavior is smaller compared to the benefits that we have from publishing data and from pre-registration. That's it.
Julia, you had another comment as well.
Yeah, I had another comment because I completely see the point that there might be this disadvantage that people who say that they pre-registered already get a head start without having checked properly what they pre-registered exactly. But I also think, well, that's in terms of a cost-benefit analysis, I agree that there might be a few bad practices arising from that, and it only works if it's properly conducted from the start to the end by all of the parties involved. But given that those people might claim that they pre-registered something that they actually didn't, it's also a bit more transparent afterwards, because everyone who reads the paper can actually go and see whether this has been done or not. So of course they might not do it, but it's potentially possible. Exactly the same with the data. If it's not there, I can't check, but if it's there, even if it's fraudulent and nobody checks it, but if one person afterwards checks it, there's always a high risk involved. So I think overall, the benefits we can get from this are a lot more than the disadvantages. But I do see the points. I mean, there is room for potential problems here.
Gabriele, so Antonia, you have a different question, right? So I'll continue this discussion. Or okay, do you want to say something about this?
Me?
Yeah, Antonio. Yeah.
I mean, no, it's like it's exactly the kind of thing that I also would like to discuss, because I think Anna really makes a very good point. So I'd rather wait until Anna can also reply, and then maybe if I have something new to say, I'll say something.
Okay.
Okay. Then just briefly, because I was writing, but my point was not that pre-registration, like this possibility of fraud or using the pre-registration as a bad cue would really be so bad that it outweighs all the potential benefits. My point was just a counterpoint to what Gabriele said, that there's no harm, that there's absolutely no harm in using pre-registration. I'm saying that rarely, I agree, I hope that it happens very rarely, but the potential is there. And it's not, I don't see it in any way comparable to, oh, if there's more data out there, then people can fake better data. It's, no, and I would also not agree to that argument, obviously.
Gabriele?
I think on the point of no harm, again, just want to reinforce that it depends on what we expect that would happen to the people or with the people that engage in these practices absence pre-registration. So I think choosing the right counterfactual, in my opinion, is essential to understand the extent to which benefits and harm exist. But I also wanted to reinforce Julia's point in the sense that pre-registration is the fact you pre-register something, the utility of it for the researcher or the impact of it doesn't end with publication. So your pre-registration is not private. It can be private to reviewers, but then it has to become public to the public. Yeah. So you're not only accountable towards reviewers, and so to the extent that reviewers are lazy, so to speak, yeah, even to the extent that it ends in the publication, it can still be costly and thus creates an incentive for the researcher, because everyone, even after publication, can inspect what's been done. So if anything, any abuse would be more likely to be detected, and I think that creates an incentive not to abuse. Yeah. So I think I just wanted to reinforce Julia's point, and I think it has to do with the fact that we don't pre-register only for the publication process, but also for posterity more in general, and that's something that maybe it's worth remembering.
Thank you. Antonio.
Yeah, I mean, this conversation is really amazing, and it's really good. So I think we should also take into account the fact that pre-registration does not happen in a vacuum, right? So it happens as like something within a broader system. So I think so for example, in this system, researchers are very busy, and they have there's pressure to publish. So it is not crazy to assume that anything that would give a little bit of an edge in terms of like providing a bit of safety when it comes to the publication process would be accepted and would be adopted. But I think that Anna's point is really important. So it's how the pre-registration is done, not whether the pre-registration is done. And this is something that other people more critical on pre-registration, and I'm not critical on pre-registration enough, I think, already talked about. So Bernard de Weser even considered that it might give a superficial veneer of rigor to something that is not rigorous at all. And this is a danger. So it is a cost. So probably in the cost-benefit analysis, we might want to consider that if a pre-registration in general might be abused, but a strong pre-registration is a pre-registration that is specific, like very exhaustive, and something that is really like a recipe, and something that is vague, then should not be considered as something that gives an edge in the publication process. What are your thoughts on this?
Can I?
Yeah, of course. Go on.
I don't think it should give an edge at all. Even a great pre-registration should not give an edge. It should just make the research more accountable. So mistakes should be more likely to be detected. It shouldn't be something that automatically makes you more publishable. Yeah, but in terms of the general research process, it should increase the confidence that something good is going to go through, and something which is not good is not going to go through. Yeah. So I agree. But even I think in the strongest form, there's a signal in the fact that the pre-registration has been is something valuable because it makes the prediction more falsifiable, something that I said before. But I completely agree that the value of the research itself is, I guess I haven't thought about it, but I guess fully independent on the pre-registration. Completely agree.
Julia.
I think I want to respond to one thing Gabriele said, which is it shouldn't give you an edge on publication. And I'm not sure if I fully completely agree with that, because I think it can help a lot and it should give you some kind of an edge, especially for a particular case, which is null results, because they tend to be just like in the drawer and not come out at all. So I think that should actually give you an edge, and that should be judged by the methods you're using, by the ideas you had, by the pre-registration. But of course, that's a bit far away from what we're discussing now, but just to make that point. And yeah.
Yeah, but sorry, but pre-registration doesn't help with that, not necessarily. You can have non-significant findings, create, write a paper on that, and then publish it in journals that do not care whether your findings are positive or negative. There are journals like this. So the pre-registration does not give an advantage.
Yeah, I agree. That depends on the assumption that, of course, editors and reviewers judge on the original idea rather than the findings, and that requires a lot more things that have to be changed before. So yeah, true.
Anna, please.
So one benefit that I missed. I know that there are some journals, too few, unfortunately, and not exactly on the ERIM list either, that conditionally accept publications based on pre-registration alone, and after that you go collect data. So in those situations, I can see how it has immense benefits for researchers. It saves you a lot of time, and also very good benefits for science, because you accept things based on how relevant they are, how well planned they are, and not based on the results, because let's face it, reviewers will still be influenced by those p-values, even if you say it was pre-registered or not. So I don't know much about how the field is moving in that direction, but how many journals are there that conditionally accept studies, pre-registered studies, and how many of those are included in the ERIM list?
That is a great question that we need to investigate. Gabriele.
I think I raised my hand too quickly because I don't have a great answer. But there's some. I think there's some, and I don't think it has not much to do with ERIM, of course, but with the field that ERIM generally operates in. But I think register reports are, which I think is what you're referring to, they do exist in journals which are thought of as great, even at ERIM, like, I don't know, Nature Human Behavior. And I think even some top journals in Psych, that will be PSTAR equivalent, I guess. I think register report, I think for the sake of the discussion, should be probably kept separate, in the sense that there's, of course, the pre-registration element is very important in it, but I think there are difficulties with the application of that model, which are also sort of extrinsic to the discussion. So, for example, with in marketing, which is our field, Anna, yeah, many times we have these papers with a lot of studies, yeah, and I think that the model register report, it's difficult to understand how you can readily apply it there. So I think there's also work that the field has to do in terms of understanding how to exactly adopt that model. At least if we choose to keep going with this, 8 or 9 studies in a paper, it's unclear how to do that in a register report format, right? So there's a lot of challenges there, which I think are connected more with the application of the method than with the pre-registration part.
Just briefly on that point, I actually think it might be easier to do that for those studies, because from what I know, actually lots of those studies are run during the review process. So reviewers would ask, or at least parts of them, would ask, hey, but you need to add a study that would test this and that. But as far as I know, this doesn't really work like a registered report. It's you then, as an author, do the study based on what you think would satisfy the reviewers, but without having them sign off on your plan. So maybe at least for those kind of studies, this could be like one way of doing it.
For follow-up, I completely agree. I think that's a great idea, that there's fewer excuses in the review process not to make the registered report a part of it. It's more difficult when you have studies that build over one over the other from a theoretical point of view, right? That you find something in one study and then you plan the next. It's harder to plan everything in advance before you submit that kind of paper.
All right, just a very quick note on that. The ERIM journal list is being revised at the moment as we speak, actually. And one of the things we will add to that list is how many of these journals are fully open access and how many of these journals actually support pre-registration or register reports. So that will come hopefully soonish. Thanks.
That's actually great to hear. I was about to suggest that, just to have a column that would indicate that, because then it makes it easier for us to choose.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. That's definitely on the plan. Before we go, we have the last question that we're asking to all the presenters of this campaign. So the question is, if you had to choose one open science practice that is necessary to ensure transparency in your field, what would it be?
Maybe if I can go first. So I think for me, the response to that question, I thought about it a lot, is even one step before the answer to the question, which means that we should raise awareness even more and enforce an open dialogue about all the practices that can be used and should be used, and be a bit less black and white about the practices. Because in my feeling, it's always one side who says that we have to do all of the things, and there's not one thing, but we have to do everything. And then there's another side, we shouldn't do anything because it doesn't help. And I think it's very important to start creating a dialogue and actually not be so dogmatic about the one practice, because for me there is no one practice. It's always a combination of many different things and taking many different arguments in this equation. So that would be a bit of a vague answer to the question. I'm sorry.
Perfectly fine. Thank you. Who wants to continue? Gabriele? Or sorry, Antonia. Yeah.
I agree with Julia said, and again, I think there's no one solution to all the problems we have. But for my research, and I think for many other research projects that I know of, the publication of the data and also the analysis is very, very important, because it helps to test whether the effect actually exists. It helps to understand more about the actual data. It helps to generate new hypotheses. I think this is, for me at least, is maybe the one most important aspect.
Thank you. And Gabriele?
And I would agree. I think it can be misleading to do a horse race between different components that are all beneficial. But if I really have to choose, I think data is such an integral part of research in our field that it has to be transparent. It simply has to, and there's very few excuses for why it shouldn't be. So I think if I had to choose, it would have to be open data. Maybe something that I want to emphasize, or something that I think it's, again, in my opinion, a little underappreciated, is that if we stick to this journal model of publishing science, something that is not talked about enough is open evaluation. So the fact that something is published and people cannot really inspect the process that led to that publication. I'm not talking about reviewers needing to sign the reviews. I think that's something that should be kept separate as a discussion, yeah? And there's drawbacks in that. But I think the fact that reviews are not open, that no one can inspect them, and in fact, reviewers are even prevented from sharing the reviews to the public, I think it's something that would also be beneficial. I don't think it's nearly as important as open data, but it's something that very, very few people, I think, talk about. And I wonder why, because I think it's something that would be beneficial for everyone to be able to observe the research process a little more transparently.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. If there are no more comments, then I would like to wrap up this session and thank all our speakers of the panelists today, Julia, Antonia, and Gabriele. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the participants as well for the very lively discussion. Thank you, Anna, for all your bringing up all your questions and discussion. That was very interesting. So Mutaleni will put the link for the research transparency campaign in the chat. If you wanna, we still have a lot of sessions going on for the whole month, so we will be very happy to see you in the other sessions. Thank you again, and I wish you a very good morning and a very good weekend ahead. So thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.